My grandparents want to meet my kids after cutting me off for 20 years because I didn't marry the man they approved of, but I know them too well to believe they don't have an agenda. Now I'm 30, but if you ask me about my childhood, the first thing that comes to mind is silence. A heavy, thick silence that was always there, like a dark cloud hanging over my life. I lost my parents in a plane crash when I was just 7. It wasn't something I could fully understand back then, but the memories of that time always haunted me, like my childhood was ripped away from me in a way I couldn't control. I don't remember the pain of losing my parents in a vivid way, but I clearly remember being torn away from a life where things made sense and thrown into a world where everything was restricted, controlled. My grandfather, always so strict, with that retired military posture, became the one in charge of the house. Their house, my grandparents' place, wasn't a home. It was a fortress. The walls weren't just painted. They had rules, they had a power that imposed silence, discipline, and above all, conformity. My grandfather, with his perfectly trimmed gray hair and that piercing gaze, always seemed like he was waiting for me to break some rule. And most of the time I did. When I was little, I wanted to wear clothes like the other girls my age. Bright ones with funny designs, stylish sneakers, but what I got were dull dresses and dark shoes that looked like they belonged in the last century. They thought that would make me properly raised, well-behaved. My hair, which used to be long and free, was always tied up in tight braids that my grandfather insisted were more appropriate. He'd say that boys didn't like girls, with their hair flying everywhere, as he put it. I just wanted to be like the others, to play, laugh, ride bikes with my friends. But no, for him, what mattered was that I was a good girl, properly formed, and anything that strayed from what he called morality was unacceptable. I still remember the time I asked to learn how to drive. I was 16, and all my friends were excited about getting their driver's licenses. But me? I knew it would be a flat-out no. A woman doesn't need a car, my grandfather said, simple and firm, like it was some kind of divine command. I couldn't even dream about the possibility of choosing what I wanted for my life, of being in control of my own decisions. And the worst part was, as much as I wanted to scream and ask for more freedom, I just couldn't. I loved my grandparents. They gave me everything, raised me with so much care and love. But at the same time, I felt like I was swallowed up by the world they had created, where my wants didn't matter. I grew up like that, caught between care and control. Like a plant trying to grow, but its roots kept getting cut. When I went to college at 18, it was like a door open to a whole new world. A world where the rules weren't so strict, where I could be myself. That's where I met Lucas, a guy who seemed to come from a place so different from mine. He was spontaneous, fun, even a little bold. And there was something about him that drew me in, not just physically, but for the freedom he represented. Lucas made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could have something more, something that wasn't controlled, something that was mine. It was like, for a brief moment, I could really breathe, without the chains holding me back. But of course, I knew I couldn't tell my grandparents. They'd never accept a relationship like that. They'd have to approve like always. Lucas was just too different for them. He wasn't proper. I was scared that if they found out, it would all be over right then and there. So, what did I do? I kept it a secret. I was careful, hid the moments we spent together, the little trips to the movies, the lunches in the park, the exchanged glances that said more than any words. I knew I was doing something risky, but I couldn't help myself. He made me feel free, no judgments, no rules. With every meeting, I felt more alive. But at the same time, every time I went back to my grandparents' house, that weight would return. The silence again. The evaluating looks. The pressure. Conversations that could never be real, because I knew nothing could slip past the limits they set. It wasn't just about love. It was about feeling like I was living a life that wasn't mine, but was handed to me like a gift I couldn't exchange. I felt like I was at a crucial point in my life. I was no longer the submissive girl who accepted everything without questioning. I knew something had to change, but I was scared. Scared of breaking the ties that bound me to my grandparents, scared of losing what they represented. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to break free, to make my own choices. Something inside me was screaming to take the reins of my life, but with every step, every decision I made, I felt the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. And then, something happened. I fell for Lucas in a way I couldn't hide anymore. He was already part of my life, part of my truth, and I knew the time had come to make a decision. I just didn't know that this decision would change everything. After finishing college and landing a good job, life finally seemed to give me a shot. I was starting to feel like the world, for the first time, saw me as an adult, capable of making my own choices. With Lucas by my side, everything felt clearer, more possible. But there was something eating away at me from the inside: my grandparents. I knew the time had come to take the hardest step of all. I needed to, once and for all, face them and tell them my decision. I was going to live my life my way, without following their expectations. The decision to break away from what they wanted for me wasn't taken lightly. I loved my grandparents. They were the only family I had left, and everything they taught me, no matter how strict and painful, still carried a certain sense of love, of care. But it was like I was trapped in a golden cage. I no longer fit in there, and that gave me a sense of desperation. The freedom I'd been longing for was within reach, but it would only be possible if I took this step. When I finally sat down to talk to them, my heart was racing. Lucas was by my side, supporting me, but I knew this battle was mine. My grandfather, always so imposing, sat in his leather chair with his arms crossed, staring at me with that severe look. He knew something was about to happen, and I barely had a chance to speak before he interrupted me. "Are you going to leave me, Anna? Leave me for this guy? This is not how our family does things," he said, and the tone of his voice cut me like a knife. I knew he felt betrayed, like I was trying to escape his authority, using my education and job as excuses to follow my own path. My grandmother, on the other hand, always kinder, tried to find a way to soften the situation. "But, my dear, why can't you come back home? Wouldn't that be easier? You can't just throw all of this away. I raised you, I took care of you." She was always more sensitive, but her words hurt me too. I didn't want to abandon them, but I couldn't live like a bird in a cage anymore. My decision was made. "I can't, Grandma. I love Lucas and I need to live my life, choose my own path," I said, my voice almost breaking. The confrontation was as tough as I imagined. My grandfather was furious, his face as red as a tomato, his eyes almost hollow with rage. He accused me of being ungrateful, of destroying everything he and my grandmother had done for me. "You can't just turn your back on our family. You're not going to ruin our history for this man," he shouted, and I saw the pain on his face. It was like, by choosing my own destiny, I was breaking something that couldn't be fixed. I tried to explain, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm not destroying anything, Grandpa. I just want to be happy. I know what I want, and I can't live within these rules anymore." I could tell he didn't understand, that it was crushing him in a way I might never fully grasp. But as painful as it was, I knew I couldn't back down. Time went by, and even with the pressure from my grandparents, Lucas and I stayed together. The engagement was a mark of our independence, but also a challenge to them, like we were defying their beliefs and traditions. When I finally announced the engagement, I was filled with an indescribable fear. When my grandfather found out, he nearly had a breakdown. He looked at me with a gaze that said it all. "You're betraying me. You're going to distance yourself from everything we know." That's when he told me flat out, "I don't accept this man, I don't accept what you're doing. You're going to destroy your life and throw away everything we've built." The pain in his words was like a punch to the gut, but I stood my ground. He pressured me, wanting me to break off the engagement with Lucas and marry someone he approved of. A man he saw as proper, whatever that meant. But I knew with everything I had, that it wouldn't be possible. Not anymore. I wanted to be with Lucas, and no one, not even him, could convince me otherwise. The wedding was another big moment of confrontation. I knew that by taking this step, I was challenging everything they believed in. They never accepted Lucas, never accepted that I was choosing something other than what they wanted. But the love I felt for him, and the certainty that I'd made the right choice, gave me the strength to move forward. The wedding day was filled with veiled criticisms, disapproving looks, but also a sense of freedom like I'd never felt before. In that moment, marrying Lucas, I felt like I was finally breaking free from all the chains that had held me down. It wasn't easy, of course. But what would life be if I didn't have the courage to fight for what I believed was right? Lucas and I, together, built something solid. We had a future ahead of us, something that couldn't be overshadowed by the shadows of the past anymore. Over time, we had children. Our children. And, even though my grandparents never fully approved of my choice, I knew I was creating the family I'd always dreamed of, with freedom, love, and the chance to be who I truly was. No matter how much they still talked, how much they tried to make me feel guilty, I finally felt like I was in the right place. What I'd always sought was a life that was mine, a life where my choices were the only ones that mattered. And by Lucas's side, I found that freedom. The 20 years of silence felt like an insurmountable distance. It had been so long since my grandparents and I had spoken, ever since the decision I made to live my life with Lucas. The truth is, during all that time, I'd gotten used to the idea that they were in a different world, far from mine, and that our relationship was a thing of the past. Not even in my wildest dreams did I imagine that, after all this time, their phone would ring again, with a proposal to fix everything that had been broken. It was my grandfather who called. When I saw the number on the screen, my heart raced, but at the same time, a strange feeling took over me. A mix of curiosity and suspicion. Had he finally accepted that I wasn't coming back into their life? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate me, to put me in a position where I'd feel guilty for stepping away? The answer came in the tone of his voice. It was like he was trying to make up for lost time, but what he was saying was laced with a bitterness he couldn't hide. "Anna, I know time has passed and a lot has happened, but life is short, my daughter. We're getting old, and we really want to have time to get to know our grandchildren, to spend the rest of our days with you," he said. There was something in his words that sounded fake to me, like he was trying to convince me that his longing was sincere, but a longing that only showed up now, when time was running out. I can't explain it, but everything he said felt like manipulation disguised as regret. During the conversation, I realized something I couldn't ignore. He still didn't accept Lucas. It was like the issue wasn't just an emotional barrier from the past, but a rejection that still hung in the air. My grandfather insisted that I come to their house, but then made sure to make it clear that Lucas wasn't welcome. No, he wouldn't be the one there. He didn't want my husband around. "You can come, Anna, but don't bring that guy. He's not part of our family," he said firmly. My chest tightened. How could he say that about Lucas? He's always been my family. He and our kids were everything to me, and what they were asking of me was an impossible choice. My family or my freedom. How could I be so selfish as to accept a condition like that? What he was asking wasn't reconciliation, but submission. I couldn't live in that kind of relationship anymore, where the rules were dictated by them, where the acceptance of who I chose for my life had no value. But I still wanted to understand what was behind all of this. Why, after all this time, was my grandfather trying to convince me to come back? I asked for a straight explanation, a clear reason for this behavior. And the answer came like a bombshell. "You need to understand, Anna, we're getting older, and time is running out. We need you. If you can, bring your kids. Who knows, maybe one of you could be a match for a kidney transplant." I froze. The request sounded as cruel as it was unexpected. Grandma, Anna's grandmother, was gravely ill. She was suffering from terminal kidney disease, and a kidney transplant was her only hope. The pressure was mounting, and now, with her health rapidly deteriorating, they were holding on to one last attempt at reconciliation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had never shown any genuine interest in my life, not once, and now, when things were getting serious for them, they remembered us? Anger and hurt mixed together, creating a storm inside me. It felt like, suddenly, everything I'd built over the years was being put to the test. I felt like I was once again a little girl, being forced to make decisions that weren't mine, being pressured into following a path they dictated, as if nothing had changed. I knew that, no matter how difficult it was, I couldn't let myself succumb to this pressure. The life I had built with Lucas, the family we created, was at risk, and now the expectation of a kidney transplant was putting it all in a moral and emotional dilemma. I knew that the decision to help my grandparents wouldn't be simple. Even though I felt disconnected from them, the voice of morality and family still weighed on me. The question that kept echoing in my head was, if I didn't help, would I be selfish? If I didn't do what they asked, would I be closing a door I might want to open again in the future? Conversations with Lucas became more and more tense. He understood me completely, knew I was being forced to face a past I never wanted to remember again, but at the same time, he didn't want me to do something against my principles, to go back into a relationship that had caused me so much pain. Anna, no matter what happens, I'll be with you, whatever the decision. But don't let them dictate your future. What matters now is our family. I knew Lucas was right, but I also knew that the weight of a decision like that would be something I would carry with me forever. As the anger and resentment grew inside me, a part of me also wanted peace, wanted to close that painful chapter. But was it even possible to find peace after everything that had happened? The only thing I knew was that, once again, I was at a crossroads in my life. The anger that spread through my whole body when I got the help request was so intense I could barely think. I was sitting in the kitchen, alone, my phone in my hands, and the feeling of outrage just took over me. I couldn't understand how, after all those years of neglect and absence, my grandparents had the nerve to try and control my life again. And the worst part? They were doing it under the pretext that they needed me to save my grandmother, who was supposedly on her deathbed. It was a desperate move, and I felt humiliated being used like that. My grandfather, always so rigid and set in his ways, always so focused on his rules and traditions, didn't seem ready to let go of the control. He wanted our relationship to be rebuilt, sure, but on his terms. He wanted me to go back to that place of submission, where my voice didn't matter, where my decisions were secondary. He didn't actually want to reconcile. He wanted me to be that obedient granddaughter he'd shaped in my childhood, the one who lived up to his expectations. He wanted my family to be an extension of him again, not an independent, free part of my life. And when he said Lucas wasn't welcome, that was the last straw. I knew right then and there that I had to make a decision. It was like I was caught in the middle of an emotional storm, trying to find a balance between family loyalty and loyalty to what I'd built for myself. But the answer was clear. My life wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. Not by them, not by those outdated rules they kept trying to impose. Not anymore. In our final confrontation, my voice was steady. I was crying, but the words came out strong. If you really want to be part of my life, you're going to have to accept my family as it is. I won't let your worldview destroy what I've built. Lucas is the person I've chosen to live with. If that's not enough for you, then there's nothing else to talk about. You have no place in my heart anymore. My grandfather tried as usual to accuse me of dishonoring the family, of disrespecting tradition, but I didn't care anymore. It wasn't about honoring expectations that weren't mine. It was about protecting the family I'd created, which was real and truly my only loyalty. Without looking back, I hung up the phone, blocked his number immediately, and for the first time, a sense of relief washed over me. The decision was made, and there was no room for regret. I knew I'd done the right thing, no matter how hard it was. The emotional weight of all those years of manipulation, of control, finally hit me, and I realized this was the only way to move forward in a healthy way. No more interference. No more guilt. Months passed, and the news of my grandmother's death hit me like a shock, but it didn't affect me the way I expected. I was at peace with the choice I made, even though I knew for many, it would have been unthinkable. For me, it was the closure of a painful chapter that lasted for years. I didn't go to the wake. No goodbyes. I was at peace, and that was the only farewell I needed, letting go of the past. My grandfather, now old and frail, was put in a nursing home. I didn't feel obligated to visit him, to get involved in his life again. I didn't feel selfish for that. His life was now between him and his medical care, between him and the memories of the choices he made. I couldn't carry the guilt of decisions that were his, of actions he never apologized for. I stayed quiet for a while, reflecting on everything that had happened. But as time went by, I knew my decision was final. I was free. Free from the expectations of a past that no longer belonged to me. Free to create the family I'd always wanted, with no more interference, no more impositions. I had my peace now. And more importantly, I had Lucas, our kids, and the life we'd built together. That was enough for me. When I looked back, the only thing I felt was gratitude for everything I'd learned. That story with my grandparents wouldn't be the last one in my life, but it would definitely be the last time I let myself be manipulated by something that didn't reflect who I am. Today, I'm just me. And that, as simple as it is all I need to be happy.